Welcome to the Moonbeaming podcast. I'm Sarah Faith Gottesdiener, an artist, author, and intuitive. And together we'll explore life through a creative and spiritual lens. You'll learn so much about mysticism, creativity, consciousness, depth psychology, business, and more. And you'll get to listen to conversations with luminaries that you won't hear anywhere else. With each episode, you'll receive insights, frameworks, inspiration, and tools to help you thrive and grow. Hello, and welcome back to the pod. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you so much to the wonderful listeners. Thank you for sharing the podcast. Thank you for reviewing the podcast. And a deep thank you to the Patreons. If it weren't for you supporting the show, there would be no show. And I love getting to spend time with you at the monthly gatherings. I love hearing from you. I just feel very grateful. We just wrapped up a pretty long facilitation of the Artist's Way. Yes, that Artist's Way. If you've never done it before, highly recommend. I was pretty blown away. I'm probably going to pop right back into it, honestly. But what made it great was the group. And the group mostly came from Patreon. And they're people I have had the honor and the privilege to get to facilitate along and learn from and grow with. And just like my heart opened so much. And if you're someone who took part in the Artist's Way, you'll know exactly what I mean. And that kind of always happens in our containers together. I just feel really blessed and really lucky that the people I get to work with are just so open-hearted, so smart, so interesting, so creative, so vulnerable, and are just awesome people. So thank you. And again, thank you, listener. Thank you for being here. I'm so curious to know what you think of this next couple series of episodes. And this is because these episodes were unplanned. Shocking? No, bunny. I am a planner. Part of how I make a living is by making planners. But this series was unplanned. It really wanted to come out. I am definitely trying to be more fluid, more improvisational. It's really super useful. So I paid heed, hoping it would be helpful to you, because things I was learning and things I was parsing out kind of blew my mind. And I wanted to present it to you kind of in the state as I'm thinking it through to help you think about some things as well. And the topic of the next couple episodes, I'm calling magical thinking versus magical thinking. I haven't really done a podcast around magic in years, and that's because I stopped practicing formal magic. I stopped practicing in the ways I had done previously for years. I might share more about that more privately. And even that statement it's not totally true. I still keep up my energetic practices, my energetic hygiene, meditation, prayer, witnessing and honoring certain lunations, as well as somatics and hypnosis work and visualization work. So, I've been doing stuff. I got a couple of certifications in the last couple of years, both in hypnosis and somatics, and I'll probably continue on. I've started another program I may or may not finish. I'm doing stuff. I'm doing things around state changes. And I count state changes as magic. As magic is the art of changing consciousness at will. Anytime you change your perception, anytime you change your mind, anytime you change your energy, that is magic, y'all. That is magic, mundane magic. That is everyday magic. It's magic. Magic requires attention, presence, imagination, compassion, and magic requires belief. And I don't know about you, but if you listen to this podcast, I'm going to guess you can relate to the themes of this episode and what I'm going to say next. I am both a skeptic and a believer. I'm a believer because, first and foremost, I am a practical person and I have seen very real results from magic that cannot be explained. I have, for 7 years, made a living being a psychic, giving people accurate information from their guides, from their beloved dead, from their ancestors, sometimes from their pets. I don't know how it worked, but it worked. I would not stake a reputation or do this work or do work about this work if I myself had not experienced major results as a result. So there's that. And I'm a skeptic for a lot of different reasons. That would be its own episode as well. Some of the things that the current and past New Age peddles are completely bonkers, like BANANAS, It ranges from like this simply ridiculous to appropriative and not okay to truly, 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 truly harmful. Can you tell I've had one cup of coffee too much? It's when I get a little bit punchy. And honestly, while I don't love a lot of the stuff that the New Age purports, there are certain beliefs that they espouse that have certain truths to them, again, within nuance and layers, while also acknowledging, friends, that I hold certain beliefs that have absolutely, again, contributed to growth and transformation and more wholeness and better quality of life and like very much shifted healing processes and in a lot of ways saved me on different levels, including spiritually, that others might find totally bonkers, totally BANANAS. I'm aware of that. Things like past lives, energy. I mean, like people are like, don't think energy work is real. I mean, again, that's always going to kind of shock me, but here we are. Moon mapping and the lunar work that I teach, psychic ability. A lot of people they think psychics are fake. They think they're making them up. And again, if I hadn't experienced it myself, I don't know, especially culturally with how intuitive psychics, mystics are often treated. They're often condescended to, they're made fun of, they're ridiculous. What are other things? I believe in the ability to forecast the future. I believe that we can listen to and speak with the dead, the guides. I believe all of us can channel. I believe that all of us can engage with nature and plants and animals, the more than human realm that do not necessarily speak in human language, right? I understand that for many, many people, and probably for most people, they just think I'm cuckoo banana Cocoa Puffs, right? And I went to Smith College. I graduated with honors. I worked in corporate and did very well for a couple years. I am a skeptic. Again, I'm like, there's certain things I draw a hard line at. I also do believe, quite frankly, with spirituality and with magic, there needs to be a certain level of material change and a certain level of material success with spirituality and magic, because more than anything, we live on the material plane and we need material evidence. If it's not making your material life better, honey, baby, sweetie, why are you practicing it? If like looking at the transits every day is giving you hives of anxiety because you're terrified of a planet, maybe step away from the app. Spirituality, creativity, magic should enhance your life and empower you, not detract from your life or cause you anguish. And a lot of my material success, I have to give it up to magic, and also a lot of consistent work, really hard work for many years, strategy, learning a ton, and being talented at certain things. Because you can't run a business solely with magic or solely with, magical thinking. You can't run a business with thoughts and prayers, friends. That is also BANANAS, And so if you're like me, you're probably both and. You're probably a hard worker. You're probably a skeptic who does believe in mysticism and spirituality, magic perhaps, because you've seen how it transforms your life positively. And also, you understand the scientific method. I'll always have this tension because I'm a mystic. I won't ever be respected as if I were like a neuroscientist or a doctor or something, you know? I understand how many people view the kinds of beliefs I'm talking about here, whether it be past lives, intuition, psychic ability, energy work, transformation through the archetypes, shadow work, working with the moon, working with herbs. Some people even think like herbs are BANANAS, even though almost all of our medicines come from plants, you know? Speaking of all that, speaking of the scientific method, what I have noticed is that when certain people, namely much more, I don't know what the word is, just like societally deemed reputable, like able bodied, white, cis, straight man with a degree from like a very, very, very reputable institution or school endorses a method or has the resources to test something out or create something, it enters the mainstream in a certain way and then it becomes acceptable because they can find the science or have the resources to prove it in a certain way. And that's the other thing I think will continue to happen. I think that as even things like psychedelics or different forms of consciousness enter into different arenas, different communities, those communities that might have the resources to utilize the scientific method around them might begin to take an interest. And, not to be pessimistic, but often also when there is money to be made from something, there is more motivation in our society to look into it, to market it, to do tests on it, and to make it more accessible. And so right now, it's often up to these people, like I'm thinking of Dr. Brian Weiss, the accomplished MD who wrote a very famous book about past lives. I'm thinking about Gabor Mate, also a doctor who writes about more cutting edge things like the trauma epidemic that has swept the globe, about different mind body connections that, is not mainstream thought in the Western medical system. And I want to be really clear. I'm super grateful to those people who are willing to explore the unknown and the unseen and put themselves out there and possibly risk ridicule or attacks or disgrace. That's a lot to contend with. I would love to have Dr. Brian Weiss on and ask him about what changed in his life after he came out with past life work, which is, again, it's very, very edgy, I would say. I'm sure some of you even listening to this probably aren't sure about past lives. I'll do an episode on it though. And also, I want to parse out that a lot of these beliefs are already found in animistic philosophies, indigenous practices, and then the kind of core philosophy attached to these beliefs, like the greater picture, the context, the deep dive into these practices are often stripped away, like they're often whitewashed. I think about, and again, I always feel a little weird like calling out individuals on the podcast, but I'm just using this as an example. I think about Andrew Huberman, who I don't have great feelings about, but I think about Huberman, again, whether you like this person or not, they have a huge influence on the current culture with NSDR, which he calls non-sleep deep rest, which is essentially yoga nidra without the spiritual component. And as I was taught yoga nidra, it's a way to achieve enlightenment and access other realms and fields, and is often thought of as a creation and manifestation technique. And that context, at least the context that I was taught in, was very much rooted in Vedic philosophy, in Hinduism, because it stems from one of the two epic Sanskrit poems of India from around 300 BCE. And so we had to learn where it came from. We had to learn about the myths, the Vedic myths that were created around this and in tandem around it. And when we're learning about non-sleep deep rest, you don't hear anything about that. You don't hear anything about that. And so I think that we miss out on the appreciation and the context of a practice when all of the tradition and the origin of something is removed, you know? And I'm just naming all of this. I don't have a major conclusion. I'm too old and tired to even have a bone to pick at this point. I'm just sharing these thoughts because I don't often hear other folks talking about this. And I feel the need to from time to time, especially if we are interested in evolution, in respectful practicing, especially if we're at least attempting to, however we can, to decolonize our thinking and our practices and to remain in some kind of level of respect or integrity around what it is we're doing. That was a lot. Is the episode over? No, no, she's not. But what I'm sensing into and what I'm seeing right now, what I recently had like a lightning bolt around this, like a reconnection around this idea, is that I think that collectively there is a massive need for magic and magical thinking that empowers us not only individually, but collectively, which is, of course, what magic is for. And it's what we see in enduring populations that have fought very, very violent oppression for thousands of years. And you often see within spiritual traditions that are very old a personal or perhaps ancestral and land-based connection that was key to their enduring and their survival and their flourishing. Spirituality, creativity, imagination, these are the qualities we need to tend to. I also think they're things to protect. I'm talking, of course, about enchanting the world and re-enchanting the world, which is what we kind of need in order to stay alive, you know? Of course, staring at screens are going to de-enchant the world. Of course, the same thing over and over again is going to de-enchant you. Of course, endless scrolling and being bombarded with advertisements and manipulations and this and that and fear mongering and all of that. Of course, it's going to take away from your energy. And it's even as I have taken a break from doing more involved, I would say, magic, I'm also realizing that I did miss it. And my life did become less magical. It became less alive feeling, I suppose. So I'm really directly seeing the link between practice, enchantment, and aliveness. I think we need to bring enchantment back. I think all our lives need romance, imagination, creativity, play, more fun, more joy. You're probably nodding along. Great, 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 great. Good, good, good. And I wanted to start today's episode off with an exploration and a compare and contrast into what is called magical thinking in psychology terms, and then magical thinking, like magic terms. And this all came about after I read an article about trauma survivors and magical thinking. And so it was foreground in my mind with the eights, particularly the Eight of Swords, with the whole no one is coming to save you idea that I unpacked in that episode. You can check that episode out if you haven't heard it. So this was like a very long intro. I'm going to begin the episode with a content warning. I don't go in deep at all about trauma. I just note it. I just say the word trauma. I say the word trauma survivors several times, so I don't go into any detail about anything. But I do talk about things like inappropriate behavior and patterns of harm and things like that. So if you don't want to listen to that, that's totally fine. You can log off and you can tune in next week when I'm going to get into magical thinking. So let's explore part 1. So first, let me just define magical thinking. It's defined this way. It is a coping mechanism of trauma survivors. Magical thinking is a common sign of psychological trauma. It's a form of disassociation, a coping skill that enables the mind to disconnect from overpowering experience. Magical thinking, another definition I came across, is the belief that a person's thoughts, words, or actions can cause real-world consequences, even though there is no logical connection between the two. It's also known as superstitious thinking. Magical thinking is the belief that one's thoughts by themselves can bring about effects in the world, or that thinking about something corresponds with it happening in the external world. As I'm reading this aloud, what does that even remind you of? To me, it reminds me of the law of attraction on some level, and it reminds me of, again, this idea that your thoughts create your reality, which has levels of truth to it and also does not have levels of truth to it, and any time that something cannot apply to everyone, we just want to be critical. We want to just be mindful. We want to use our discernment. I would also tack onto this, that this comes from, for children who, for people who had childhood trauma, for parentified children, for children of emotionally immature parents. I would also add, this corresponds with this belief that you are the cause of something, and it gives you more responsibility and more of a burden than is appropriate. And this is, I think, where I just want to underscore that I think this is where this begins, is having parents that implied directly or implicitly that you were to blame for certain things that you didn't have anything to do about because you're a child, and no child, you know what I mean? I mean, unless, again, we could always point to other examples. There's always nuance, right? But, there can be this implication that you're the reason why dad got in a bad mood and is angry. Sometimes you're directly told it's your fault. Sometimes it's just implied, or sometimes with our childlike brains, we connect things that don't necessarily need to be connected. For example, you are a child and you break your bicycle, and then a couple hours later, dad comes home and he's screaming. The two things might not even be connected, right? But we will connect those dots when we're children because a child's brain is not fully formed. And that's what we want to be careful about in our own lives, especially with very rigid thinking or either or thinking. It's often not necessarily reality, you know? So, in this episode, which is part one, I'm going to explore three common forms of magical thinking from a psychological perspective that might be hindering you. It might be damaging your growth. And then I'm going to kind of like get into where it intersects with magic or spirituality or explore magical thinking. And then in part two, I'll explore more ideas of magic and magical thinking. Like, what are some of the basic tenets of a magical, romantic, enchanted life? Okay. Okay. Because I guess, like, I'm just thinking out loud here. Again, I don't have a thesis fully formed. I did not do any experimentations. I collected no data sets. I have not used the scientific method, but I was really fascinated between ideas in magic and spirituality, and maybe we could even extend that to religion, and this idea of magical thinking that psychologists posit are based in harm and based in trauma. And I found it really interesting. And I can't do a data set around like how many survivors are magicians or witches or mystics, or how many people have turned to spirituality or creativity to begin their growth process and their healing process. I was really fascinated by it. So I'm going to start with some common forms of psychological magical thinking, with yet another caveat that there are possibly dozens of these ways of magical thinking that exist. Maybe we could even call them cognitive distortions. I don't know. But we got to keep this under an hour ish. So I'm just doing three, friends. As you listen, you can think about maybe some of your own that don't make it into the episode. I specifically picked the ones I came across that, again, feel directly linked to spirituality and magic. And I'm also not hating on anything here either. I'm not saying there's right and wrongs. Please understand that. If you believe you're part mermaid or you're part alien and it's not causing you harm or anyone else harm, heck yes. You know, we all have our own beliefs, and I may not agree with everyone's beliefs. We all have our edges, we all have our lines. So long as they do not harm the person who believes it and other people, so long as they keep the peace and keep understanding and compassion, I'll always respect difference and humanity. Okay, number one. Number one is, if I avoid it, it will go away. Delusion, denial, not just a river in Egypt. Not paying attention to things. And I can also see this in the law of attraction idea, like what you pay attention to grows, which is true, which is true. And also we can use it as like, don't pay it any mind, don't pay any attention. But if there's a leak in the roof and you don't pay attention to it, your roof might get completely damaged. But this idea of avoidance is incredibly common in dysfunctional families. Ignore it when, again, like dad gets mad. Don't talk about the hole in the wall. Don't talk about what happened last night, and on and on and on. And this is also, of course, culturally enforced because we see what happens to survivors: ridicule, harassment, harm, much worse. We have been taught to protect abuse, specifically to protect more masculine forms of abuse and violence. And so this breeds disassociation, shame, and down the line, it might seep into our lives around money stuff, debt, you know, certain addictive patterns. It might keep us in harmful situations, or maybe even just like medium situations, like lackluster situations past their expiration date. We might translate like being able to tolerate a lot from our childhood, with being able to tolerate more than the average bear in our adult life. We might even take pride in our ability to deal with harder things or harder people, or we might overlook red flags in the beginning because we were taught to just look away. I'm not shaming anyone here. I've done this many times, and look at our culture. Did the climate crisis get any airtime at the last presidential debate? Are we hearing at all about COVID rates going up in the media? Like, at all? American culture, I can only speak to where I'm currently situated. We are a culture of delusion and ignoring things. We're a culture of ignoring reality, you know? We all have it in our own lives, I think, to a certain extent. But again, it can be pronounced with people who have histories of trauma. We might hide things, we might lie because we don't want to get punished or in trouble, or again, because we simply grew up in a family that swept things under the rug, and we know what might happen if we bring something. We also know how harmful ignoring things is. I mean, on many levels, but it can really impact our intuition, especially if we have been gaslit for years or decades simply because our family of origin doesn't want to deal with certain things and certain dynamics that are painful or harmful. You're too sensitive. You made me do it. It's not a big deal. If you hadn't done this, then we wouldn't have done that. You can look up DARVO, DARVO. That's Defend, Attack, Reverse, Victim Order. All these deflections that end up causing toxic shame. Denial and repression can also lead to like toxic positivity, extreme masking, the inability to process hard emotions, and worse, like ignoring medical issues, again, ignoring abuse, ignoring big things like bills or a leak in the roof, extreme disassociation, and so on and so forth. This is also the opposite of magical thinking. Shall I call it magical thinking to differentiate? Because we know as spiritual practitioners, creatives, survivors, witches, mystics, we understand we have to look directly at the thing. We have to confront it. We have to be with it. We can't shove it back into the shadows or repress it. Most of us know that shadow work, aka, looking at things that cause us discomfort, whether positive nor, not so positive, is an important aspect of any spiritual path and any spiritual practice. You must look at things you do not want to, love it, accept it in order to metabolize it, integrate it, heal, and grow, For a lot of us who are cycle breakers, this also looks like naming and acknowledging the dysfunction we've grown up around, sharing about it, talking about it, learning more about, how that might affect our everyday present life in order to recover and then create different and new patterns and templates. So that's number one. Number two, someone is coming to save you. It's a rescue-based one. And this is a big one. And again, I can see this in our culture, can't you? Like, think about these very popular movies. Think about like almost every like major studio motion picture hero action film. It's very rare. I mean, I guess, again, my partner, who's a major buff of these kinds of movies, would probably argue with me if he was here, but he's not. It's just me. I just think about the hero. There's usually like it's rare that there's one team. Of course, I'm like thinking of Star Wars and things like that. Like, but there's usually like one superhero, like Superman or whatever, that like saves the day, you know? Someone's coming to save you. So a child will begin to come up with fantasies around that. You're actually someone else's family. You are switched at birth. There's a literal folklore about that in many cultures. Like, I think it's like the trolls come and switch up the babies. I think there's a name for it. Or maybe you were positive that you were a mermaid, and if you spent enough time in water, you'd be able to be whisked away to Triton's den and live forever with the fishies and the other mer people and live in utopia. That was one of mine, by the way. You're in my company if you also thought you were a mermaid. And I want to be really clear. There's like a fine line here between this one and developing a rich and textured imagination. Like, please pretend to be a mermaid. There's also like, I was thinking about this, where my brain goes. I was thinking of the literal mermaids. I think they're in Florida, or like they have like tails and you can pay to swim with them and they make money. And there's like a whole industry around mermaids and mermaid tails and going to visit the mermaids and mermaid shows and like all of that. So that's like a really amazing example of people making a living off their fantasies. I think about Comic Cons. I think about people who are into fantasy novels and sci-fi, the huge success that authors have found. Again, there's entire industries that have built up around this. And I think it's beautiful. So again, I really need y'all to understand I'm being really neutral here. And former, raise his hand, former mermaid. I would like spend so much time in the bath and so much time in the ocean, like hoping that I would turn into a mermaid. Hi, hello. It's also completely normal developmentally, pretending to be an animal or a tree, or like this is like what you see kids do. They're playing. It's this building of imagination, creativity. I also think it's a precursor to empathy, being able to think of yourself as something different, being able to put yourself in another's proverbial shoes or tail. It's literally ends up being compassion for other people. And imagination brings us everything: art, children's books, cartoons, again, fashion lines, fantasy, sci-fi, poems, incredible fusion cuisines and architecture, and I could be here all day. There is this line of thinking, however, that can be damaging if it seeps you in total fantasy and non-action and not taking part in life and not expressing your gifts and not moving forward and not trying out for things and not connecting with others and not applying for the job or the grant or, taking the class, or if it keeps you separate from living life because you're just waiting. You're waiting to get permission from someone else. You're waiting for someone to come and swoop in and tell you that you're special and it was always you and they're going to be your person and Like, if the belief that you are a Lumerian from Lumeria stops you connecting with others because you're somehow better than humans and you can only connect with other aliens and no one can understand you and if it boosts your isolation, you might want to look into that, And of course, we see this with ascension philosophies and the New Age. We see all the stuff with like, I'm leaving the matrix and like all this stuff. And often it's a privilege to be able to opt out of the matrix. Like, I haven't figured it out yet. Hello, I'm still paying my taxes and running my errands at the CVS. Like, hi, hello. She uses stamps, friends. Like, that I'm fully not out of the matrix. And that's part and parcel, I think, again, this like, it's this avoidance. It kind of goes back to number one, not having capacity to deal with the real world, real life disappointments, all of the tragedies happening with the world. That also goes, with number one. And I think really ultimately what it speaks to is a lack of capacity, really, that might have been forged in childhood through like you needed an escape through books, movies, television, imagination, all of that, because reality was so painful and you needed to imagine yourself out of there because reality was heartbreaking, and reality can be heartbreaking. Still, it is for millions of people. And when you're a child, you need to believe that someone is going to save you because you're so innocent and you're so helpless. You're so dependent on others. You need to believe that. I also, though, can see this in certain ways that folks think about and talk about modalities such as astrology, using it as an excuse, saying like, oh, well, of course I'm bad with money because I have my Neptune and Pisces in the second house. Or, of course I get angry. I have an Aries moon, or like these ridiculous things, which is an excuse. And sometimes it's like not even astrologically accurate. It's like, oh, well, this is just the way things are. Like I can't do anything about it. And I see people do this all the time, Oh, well, Saturn's in my seventh house. Guess I'll never find true love. Like, huh? What? Sorry, what? Astrology isn't an excuse for you to do better and to grow and to change your behavior, you know? And so this form of magical thinking also ties into a victim mentality, which can be really, really harmful. You know, it also can, I think, tie into like it's never the right time to make changes or something, like you waiting for more stability in order to move forward or try something. I see this in myself if I'm not careful. Like I'll notice it with statements of like, next week I'll start drinking more water. Tomorrow I'll try to get more sleep or start on my passion project or whatever, insert your thing here, just got to get like, if you find yourself being like, just got to get through the next week, then we have to be mindful and careful of that. As well as this also goes into thinking everything is forever. You had not a great relationship. That doesn't doom you to only having not great relationships, having, a bad day at work or a bad month or even a bad year, maybe you are struggling with finding work or something. I know it's very hard to not slip into dejection. I have been there. Believe me, I've been there. But just not digging yourself in deeper by confusing the temporary with forever. It's not something that is just happening once or twice or again, even for a year, even for 2 years, even 3 relationships. It's not always going to be that way. We always have choice. We can zoom out and think about what patterns are happening and what we're responsible for and what we might need to tweak or change and begin to do the work of creating that change. Other ways this one pops up is, waiting for someone to figure it out for you, to do anything, making impulsive decisions because you just think, oh, it's okay, I'll figure it out later, or getting into debt and being like, it's okay, I'll win the lotto or come into a major windfall, then I'll pay off my debt or something. I think the main thing that I thought about with this one is that it reinforces this subconscious belief that you lack the ability to change, to choose, to take action, that you lack the authority to make certain decisions for yourself and your life. It reinforces a subconscious belief that you can't figure things out, that you're not to be trusted, you're not safe to be trusted, or and then it just keeps like reinforcing other subconscious beliefs like you'll never get out of this mess, or you can't make a change, or nothing will change, or things will never change. And you also end up giving away a lot of your authority or a lot of the capability or the abilities that you do have to others, you know? So you can try like do a both and. You can buy a lotto ticket and figure out a savings plan, or a debt repayment plan. You can pretend you're a mermaid and fold your laundry today or tomorrow, not 2 weeks from now or not when you get more space. You know what I'm saying? Okay. All right. This can really affect you and really seep into your brain if you buy into wellness culture or external people like marketing experts or people who will make promises that might not be real. Take our supplement and save your life. Heal your trauma in 1 hour with this workshop. Again, I'm not saying that there are not incredible practitioners, remarkable thought leaders, life-changing workshops, absolutely phenomenal trainings, and supplements that really forking work. I've taken them. I've bought them. I've taught them. I've tried them. They exist. But if you're desperate and looking for a solution, be discerning. Be mindful of people that promise you an easy, quick fix, that they have the solution for you. Sometimes it's never really an easy fix. Usually, it's a mixture of things that you try and you adapt to and you create and you experiment with and you practice and you build into your everyday life and you trust your intuition around and you move forward on and, so on and so forth. Like, for example, my long, long, long ongoing recovery from long COVID, I tried so many different things, friends, you know, but I also understood that not one healer, not one thing most likely was going to be the answer. It was going to be a mixture of things. I did encounter many people telling me they had the answer to all the problems, that they took the supplement and it worked. And for them, maybe it did. Maybe it did. Their friend did this thing and it cured everything. And again, maybe it did. Especially no one thing for me with like healing from CPTSD. No one thing. There are things I'm like, oh yeah, this was a big puzzle piece. This was a big puzzle piece. This was a big puzzle piece. But the way I see recovery processes, especially for more complex things, more individual things, is exactly that. It's a puzzle. It's like a puzzle. And I wish I could say, listen, y'all, if we could figure out the quick fix that would work for 90% of people with, all of these things, I am here for it. I am rooting for it. I am hoping it will happen. But what I have found more often than not, that it is a mixture of different things at different times, and that we heal and come into wholeness in stages, in steps. So, like, for example, in my classes, I share and teach what has worked for me while also acknowledging everyone has their own unique background and everyone's going to be different. For one person, it's movement. For the other, it's breath work. For another, it's astrology. Everyone has their things that work for them, and everyone is different. There are truths and there are foundational things I think are non-negotiable, such as developing your intuition and learning energy work and energy hygiene and nervous system health and somatics and healing shame and doing subconscious reprogramming. I could like be here all day. And shadow work and learning how to process and feel your feelings, as well as fun, connection, relationships, pleasure, joy. For me, like working with the moon and moon mapping, I will say it really did change my life. I have certain go-tos and certain things I've tried that I think just are non-negotiables for folks, that I think, these practices and tools and techniques are absolutely foundational. And there's more of those, of course, obviously. For some people, it's yoga. For some people, it's aerial dancing. For some people, it's polyamory. There's all, again, but this is also why I believe intuition, learning how to locate and trust and develop and act upon your intuition is so important, because it's about you figuring that out for yourself, and your intuition often is going to be the puzzle piece that begins to put all the other puzzle pieces back together. So, the solution to this one is taking responsibility. It's cleaning up messes. It's getting a plan together, going slowly but surely at the state of your nervous system. We all need help. All of us need help. If you are disabled, if you're sick, if you're alive on this planet in 2024 and beyond, you need help. We are not meant to go it alone, no matter who we are. Reach out for support. Connect with other people. Rely on other people. Pay other people for help. If you can't, figure out other ways. But don't outsource all your agency, all your ability, and all your power in the process. That's what I want to underscore. And this is the way that I practice and have taught magic, because there is always an aligned action phase. Yes, cast the spell, but apply for 50 jobs. Yes, conduct the ritual and clean your house. Do both. Aligned action has to take place. Magic will help you. It has created many quantum leaps for me, but I was also putting in the hours. I was doing the work. I was, you know, calling the bank and being put on hold with them. I was learning a ton of new skills. I was writing. I was doing many, many different things in the so-called real world. It wouldn't have happened otherwise. The last example that is linked to magical thinking and magical thinking is called clairvoyant and superstitious thinking. And this is really interesting because there's these fuzzy lines. A lot of things I sometimes see called spirituality on the internet is often simply just superstition, similar to our childhood, at least. Again, I'm dating myself, similar to like this idea of don't step on a sidewalk crack, or don't look at the moon during an eclipse, or don't date a Scorpio, or whatever kind of BANANAS is being spouted here, there, everywhere online. We want to be careful. Anytime we see a do this, don't do that, anytime there's some kind of illogical rule to something, we just want to interrogate. We want to pause. We want to reflect what's really going on here. So, clairvoyant and superstitious thinking could be getting confirmation on an anxiety worry that you had, and then thinking you have more power than you do, or you begin to be afraid that your thoughts will create your reality and not a good way. This often is shame-based and creates a ton of burden on a child. Like, for example, let's just say as a child, again, you were afraid that your parents would break up because they fight a lot or something like that, and let's say like one day you had the thought that you wish that they would break up, and then they do. And either you assign your own blame to you, you think it's your fault because you had that thought. Maybe if you hadn't had that thought, maybe if you hadn't opened the door, maybe if you hadn't said that thing, it wouldn't have happened. Maybe they even tell you implicitly or directly it's somehow your fault. And this creates the setup in your mind that you are responsible in an overburdened, inappropriate way. The other thing that came up when I was exploring this one is a piece from religious trauma that I've heard folks talk about, which is that God is watching you, so you better behave. God knows what's going on in your thoughts. That can really, really, really damage a person, like on so many different levels. And let's parse this out in terms of actual intuition. If we have been raised in a denial-based household, like I talked about earlier, oftentimes our intuition has shame and distortion around it if we've shared what we see is happening or know is happening and have been denied or shot down. If we say we feel distress because there is an argument happening, which is distressful and stressful, and our parents minimize it, say it's not a big deal, or they sometimes even tell us it's not happening. No, you didn't see that. You never saw that. Such and such wasn't here. That is going to erode our connection with our intuition. Trauma erodes our connection with our intuition sometimes. It can also create a lack of self-trust, of course. It can create uneasiness if things don't go great, which happens in life. I mean, lifes. And let's parse this out more in terms of power and personal power. I believe all of us, including myself, probably including you, have more power than what we are using, like energy, ability, all of it. But none of us have the power to cause someone else's behavior, such as a divorce. And if you think that your thoughts or your magic can do that, you might want to take a couple steps back and rethink that. We are beholden to each other, as I've said. We owe each other a lot more, in my humble opinion. Not all of us, but the collective we owe each other a lot more. We owe each other a lot more of our humanity, I believe, And also, ultimately, we only have responsibility for ourselves in the way that we can only impact our own behavior. And again, nuance, additions, context, who's in our care? Our pets, kids, houseplants, who we caretake. I often think about who I have responsibility to in terms of people who work with me in groups. I think very much about that. I'm sure if you're a caretaker or care provider, you also are thinking about that too. Your clients, things like that, right? There's nuance, friends, We have a ton of power, and there are certain things we cannot control, and we should not be thinking we have any control over, And again, I'm here for forgiveness. I'm here for amends. They might be needed. They might be necessary no matter where you are. I swear, I'm sorry is one of the top 5 statements in my household after I love you and where's the coffee or where are the dog's leashes, I think it's really important to apologize and change behavior when it's time to do that. But back to intuition. If this is all pinging you, if it's all sort of oh, interesting, if it's ringing true around intuition and one of the core components of intuition, which is self-trust, that might be something for you to begin to work with. And you're not alone. It's not your fault. In developing self-trust and intuition and self-respect, and dare I say self-love, are, in my humble opinion, some of the most important things you can do for yourself and for the other people in your life and on the planet. Hopefully you enjoyed this exploration. You maybe were enlightened in some ways. I know I was very interested in this topic when I came across it. This is part 1 of 2. Next week, I'm going to talk a bit about magical thinking, some magical ideas, magical philosophies, if you will, that I think are valuable to everyone, regardless of whether you're a practitioner or you practice magic or even believe in magic. Did you know that skeptics are welcome here? I welcome you if you are skeptical of all things mystical, imaginative, magical. You're welcome here. I'm so glad you're here. Have a beautiful, beautiful week, and I'll be back soon. Bye. Moonbeaming is a Moon Studio production. It is edited by the wonderful Amelia Ruby at Softer Sounds, and theme music is by Melissa Caitlin Carter of Making Audio Magic. Hire them both for all your audio and podcast needs. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're always looking for aligned sponsors. So if you are a business or creative who'd like to sponsor an episode or two, reach out. If you love this podcast, please consider joining our membership to support it, sharing on social media, passing it along to friends, or leaving us a 5-star review. We'd appreciate it so much, and we appreciate you. Thanks for being here.